well, I guess it's time to get started. But my name is Jeremy Milander, and I am the Bazile Groundwater Management Area Extension Cropping Systems Educator. I've been in this position for just about 2.5 years, and prior to that, I was still with the university, just in different roles as a research technologist. First out at Grant, Nebraska, and then now after that, I was at Haskell Ag Lab up at Concord. So the Bazile Groundwater Management Area, you guys may or may not know about it or hear about it some, but just if you don't know, northeast Nebraska, parts of Antelope, Knox, and Pierce counties up there, Creighton, Plainview, Wausau, Orchard are kind of some of the more major towns in that area, and that area has had a heck of a history and a heck of a problem with nitrate in the groundwater. So this project is really trying to address that and educate on that. And so a little bit of history on the Bazile. You may have heard of the Bazile Triangle, and that kind of up in that area in the university, you still hear a lot about the Bazile Triangle, but technically we're not calling it a triangle anymore. Some of the studies, I think, were originally in the 80s on that area, and that's how that got started. But in 2014, the area was officially expanded to make that square. So cut off all these townships that are cut across diagonally were made so the whole township was involved in there. So that made things a little bit simpler. Another interesting fact about the Bazile is the first federally recognized groundwater focused plan in the nation to address non-point sources of pollution. So point versus non-point. Point is like a single factory, one spot getting down to the groundwater. Non-point is kind of across the landscape or a field or a much bigger area, or in this case, several different agricultural fields. So, if I can remember which button is which. So that's the square. You kind of see the towns up there. Another thing I want to point out as well that kind of makes this area a challenge as well is that it's actually the intersection of 4 different NRDs. So with 4 different NRDs, they work together a lot, but there's still different regulations and different reporting and stuff and things to get figured out. So there needs to be collaboration between there, and there is. And you can kind of see the landscape here. Up here there's not as much, but a lot of farm ground. Notice a lot of those are circles, if you can see, a lot of irrigation as well. This area, a majority of it is pretty sandy. There are some areas where they get into the glacial till up in the northeast here. But sandy soils, shallow depth to the groundwater, kind of a worst case scenario for nitrate leaching. And really up in this area, they can do pretty well with corn yields with irrigation, but that's hence why there's a lot of irrigation in the area as well. And this irrigation kind of helped lead us to not the single culprit, but has helped lead us to the issue where we're at with the nitrate issues. So here's another map just by township of the average nitrate concentration up there. I've got other maps that I maybe should have had that I like better, where everything above the federal drinking standard is orange or red or purple, but everything above yellow is above that 10 parts per million, and that's the average per township. So there are areas that are lower, but there's also areas quite a bit higher as well. So you see there's only really 2 townships here where the average is below that, and that's an issue. And some of these, especially Creighton, right here, you hear a lot about their water. They spend a lot of money on water treatment for the city of Creighton. Kind of the southeast of Creighton, there's a really hot spot. And down there they can get 30, 40, 50, I think 60 parts per million. So pretty high nitrate concentration in that neck of the woods.
What do you think makes that concentration higher?
Right there.
Water shallower? Is the soil less?
It's, for the most part, sandy soil there. I don't know if it's sandier than anywhere else right throughout the whole area, but throughout the area, pretty shallow groundwater and then sandy. Yeah, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of the demonstration sites I have here later. And one of them tried to do some deep soil sampling down to 10 foot. We were already into groundwater, and it wasn't.
And then you say the average of the township.
Yes.
Is that 20% of the wells in the township, 50% of the wells in the township? Is that the last 2 years with the same events?
This is from 2003 to 2017, is what the different NRDs have compiled. So there's 4 different NRDs.
Sure.
And you also see that N is the number of samples. So some of those we really don't have a lot of samples to go off of, but some of the hot spots, like here we've got 90. So I'm not exactly sure what percentage that is. It varies.
Okay.
That'd probably be a good thing to report or a good thing to have. And it's not, we talk about the Bazile Groundwater Management Area, and the Bazile gets a lot of attention both nationally and around here in this area, but it's not the only area in the state that has a problem. Right up here is where we're at. You can see a lot of red dots there, but a lot to the west, a lot to the south, down here in this area. And unfortunately, it's just more and more spots are popping up where this is becoming a problem. So definitely something we need to keep an eye on, and it's not going away anytime soon. So unfortunately. So as I mentioned, there's 4 NRDs in the Bazile, and kind of I want to say about 2014 or 15, they started wanting to meet more regularly and have a kind of an organized meeting and group between all of them. So they started this Bazile steering committee that meets monthly. All 4 NRDs are involved. NRCS is involved in this. Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy. The university has several different parts of the university involved as well, and there's quite a few more. I can't list them all on there, and they don't all come to every meeting, but there's a lot of people interested in this and looking at this. When they decided to do this, they also started hiring a Bazile coordinator. So there's a employee right now, it's Whitney Gappa, who is, I'm not sure her exact funding, but she's funded by NRCS and the 4 NRDs in that area, and she oversees some of the cost share stuff and works with NRCS on that, and just kind of coordinating things, putting these meetings together. There's definitely enough to do to keep her busy. Also, myself, I was brought in about 2019, so I think in 2018, somewhere in there, the steering committee started having talks with the university, and specifically the Water Center. Crystal Powers is speaking here today. I don't know if any of you have seen her talk or are planning on it, but they specifically got together and saw a need to increase the educational efforts in the area up there. So they decided to hire an educator and create a new position for that. And that's when I was hired, 2019. Most of what I do is we have grant for some demonstration and research projects. A lot of what I do is manage those sites. There's other ones helping manage those as well, and doing a lot of the outreach for those sites, and then also providing assistance on educational efforts throughout the Bazile area. And my position is actually partially funded by 3 of the NRDs, and then the university as well. So I'm a university employee, but part of my funding comes from the NRDs and this NEP grant that I'm going to talk about quite a bit more, actually. So this is a Nebraska Environmental Trust grant. So the grant was put together to have 3 different, mostly demonstration and research locations throughout the Bazile. We wanted them 3 different NRDs of the 4, and we were able to get that. And with these 3 sites, we have different focus areas, so different focuses, but they're all still coming back at the same nitrate issue. And the focus areas were a little bit determined based off of what the NRD managers individually had interest in, and kind of some of that also was influenced from the board as well. So the 3 areas that we're looking at are soil health, looking a little bit more at precision nitrogen and water management practices, and then diversified crop rotations. And this is all on irrigated ground. We also had to, in order to apply all the treatments that we wanted to do, we had VRI systems involved, variable rate irrigation, so we've got different fertigation amounts and different irrigation amounts on these sites. They're all probably about 15 to 20 acres apiece, so they're pretty sizable studies. The plots are 80 foot wide by about 120 foot long, and they're actually planted with the curve of the pivot to help us be able to apply the treatments with the variable rate system. If it wasn't for that, we'd need a lot more area, or either that or have to have a lot fewer of treatments. So I'll start kind of talking a little bit more in detail about the sites, what we're doing at these sites, and then why we're doing it. I wish I had a little bit more for results, but this is still kind of in early stages of this project. I say early stages, but we want to make sure we have data analyzed, know what's significant before we really get into details. So, another thing I didn't mention, my position started in 2019, but this project didn't get really started until 2020. Basically, the funding for it came through about a month before people would be planting. Didn't have the variable rate systems set up, didn't have farmers that were wanting to do it at that point, so we pushed it to 2020. So the 2020 growing season, which was interesting just due to everything else that was going on in 2020. It's kind of made this whole project a little interesting. And then that just finished up with the 2021 season, and then this funding will go on for the 2022 season as well. And maybe we'll do some changes, but we're gonna try to do the same thing and keep it going. Because really this issue, we maybe see some small things and be able to track a little bit what the nitrate is doing as it moves through the soil. But in order to really see what we want to see, we're going to have to look at it as a long-term thing and get some of these same plots and the same practices for longer periods of time than what most research studies or most grants look over. So the first site, I call it RSS, but that's just because we're doing a little bit more research stuff on it as well and have the graduate students. This is the soil health focused site. In addition to myself, Chris Proctor with Nebraska Extension, and then Darren Rudnick as well. So Chris is a weed scientist, but kind of working in the cover crop area. And Darren Rudnick is an irrigation specialist, almost kind of more into administration now. So he's doesn't have as much time as he used to work on this project. But a lot of what this project focuses on is the incorporation of cover crop and looking at the timing of cover crop seeding and different. And if you do anything other than what the traditional timing is of your drilling right after harvest in the fall, you need to look at different methods as well. You guys know you can't drill when there's corn out there very easily. Also at this site, a little bit with the different mixes for cover crops as well, and looking at different fertigation strategies. And I know that doesn't fit very well with the soil health deal, but everything is interrelated and also helps us get a little bit more data and compare to what we're doing for the other sites. So that's the treatment list. I know that's a lot to look at. 10 treatments. I'll start at the bottom just because so these are the different fertigation treatments: deficit fertigation, sensor-based fertigation, so there's a graduate student going out with a drone, and then based off of Ward Lab recommendations. Then all of the other ones are just different combinations of those fertigation methods along with seeding methods. So we do have our fall seeding, but we also have the interseeding at V4, which we have to use a Henniker interseeder. I know there may be a few other options for that, but basically gets a drill between the rows, gets some good seed to soil contact. The thought is going in at V4, that if you drill before that, you're more likely to have a yield impact from that cover crop. And if you get much later than that, things won't get established very well with the cover crop. So it's kind of a narrow window in there, and sometimes there's a lot of other things going on at that time of year as well, so it can be hard to do. And this equipment isn't not a lot of it around. I know there are a few units around. So, and also you see some late interseeded, and that was done with the Hagee High Boy interseeder. Dropped down in the canopy right around early September is what we're trying for. With the 2 years of this project, the first year we didn't have access to that, so it was myself and an NRD employee out with little hand fertilizer spreaders. I know it's not the same thing, but we did try to do what we could. And then actually that was what we did early on in the season. We didn't have access to it, but the later season we just had to drop by hand through the rows. But this last year, the university actually has access to a Hagee this year, but they didn't the first year. So they didn't have access to it until pretty late in the season as well. So that didn't help us very much for getting things established. But again, this is probably not a normal year either. We usually don't have 50-degree December, so it maybe get a little bit more growth in as well. But so we're also looking at a few different mixes as well. One of the things we're trying to look at for the mixes is is some research indicating that trying to achieve a final biomass of 50% grass species and 50% legume species kind of hits a sweet spot where it still takes up that nitrogen, prevents it from leaching, but makes it more available to the crop the next year. More grass makes that hard, but that's really hard to do. Yeah, that's going to vary a lot season by season. So that's the plot map that we have for this study. It doesn't really show you a lot, but it shows you we got a lot going out there. 5 different reps for this, and you'll see a few gaps in there. The first year of the study, we actually had a soybean rotation aspect of it as well. Decided we needed to simplify things to make it easier for the farmer and easier for us to work with, so that got taken out. And we decided not to have any treatments taking place with the soybean, because obviously that's a pretty large effect. So why we're doing the cover crop stuff, as a lot of you know, the cover crop can, depending on a lot of other factors, tie up some of that nitrogen so it doesn't leach. But one thing to keep in mind with your cover crops is that the biomass you achieve is absolutely critical for this. Not saying that you can't have success with your cover crops and success preventing leaching without getting planting in your seeding done early and getting good biomass, but it really helps. So that's why we have the different timing treatments of the seeding, so the early, the late season, and then also the fall drill. And I'll kind of get into a little bit more detail as to why we did that in the next slide. But another thing to think about the cover crops as well, a lot of the excess rainfall really pushes the nitrate down, and a lot of leaching occurs in the off season. So before we get a corn crop out, or before we get a crop out in the spring. So this cover crop can take up some of that water that would be excess and maybe prevent some of that from going down, and thus bringing nitrate with it. So I like this graph, kind of explains a little bit as to why that happens. So it has the corn nitrogen use. This is kind of a rough, not exact, very rough put together, but got the corn nitrogen use along the time of the year. So, and then it's got the annual rainfall pattern with the leaching potential, which are very interrelated, as you can see there. So kind of see this issue with the rainfall and leaching happening before the corn really uses it. So that's a little bit why we want these cover crops to have a little bit of biomass and taking up some of that nitrogen, maybe right in here before planting, or maybe if you're planting green a little bit after. But it helps a little bit, but still you see that a lot of this is happening after that cover crop is hopefully being terminated. So with that, I'm going to talk about the next site, talking a little bit more about nitrogen and water management, also looking at nitrogen stabilizer and inhibitor enhanced nitrogen products. This is more managed by Javan Iqbal. He is a soil fertility specialist that's hired in the last couple of years, kind of hired to replace Charlie Shapiro and Charles Wortman, if you know those guys. So looking a lot of it at different nitrogen and irrigation amounts and rates, but they're also looking at the different interactions between those, different combinations as well. Also looking at nitrogen inhibitors and enhanced nitrogen products as well. Another big thing, going back to that graph as well, that I showed the timing of nitrogen application, and looking at some of these commercially available nitrogen models as well to get a little bit more precise nitrogen management. So across the bottom there, I've got some of the treatments where 60 pounds of nitrogen versus 180 and 300. See some differences there. There's a lot more than that going on there. The treatments for this, there's enough treatments that I had to do 2 slides. I'm going to try to get through this without getting into too much of the dirty details, because you probably don't need to know that. I don't know if I need to know that necessarily. Well, the research group needs to know that, but in the middle we have what we call the nitrogen ramp. So it's 0 all the way up to 300 pounds in intervals there. And that allows us to compare what's happening with our other treatments and how much nitrate is leaching compared to different nitrogen amounts. And we all know that nitrogen and irrigation management both contributes to this issue, and there's a lot of interesting things going on with the interactions. So also looking at 3 of these rates at 75% of what the farmer wanted to irrigate, and then 50% with the same thing. There we go. So So this is the second half of the treatments. A lot of what's going on here is different timing. And I did show, I'm gonna go back one. And so the split applications, this was all done split, but where we're doing more split, they did different. Some of these had 2 of these, some of them had 3, some of them had 4. So there's pre-plant, side dress application, and then the fertigation applications as well. So the timing, we're comparing all of it being put on a pre-plant to one side dress, down to also adding the fertigation as well. Then we're also looking at some of the enhanced products, the Super U, looking at pre-plant versus the split with that enhanced product as well. Then we're also looking at all of these commercial models right there. I don't know if you can read all of them. We've got the UNL, I think that's just the algorithm, Yara, the Maze N from UNL, crop canopy sensor. So again, this one also has some work being done with a drone on there, and then granular. I don't know the exact amount that they ended up putting on there. Might be able to read through an Excel sheet and figure that out as to what we actually got on, but that'll be when we share more of our results, that should be available as well. That might be interesting to look at. And then we also have all pre-plant with and without agricane on there as well. That's the first and the last. So lots of different treatments going on out there, a lot to think about, a lot of different interactions. I've talked a little bit with Javed about some of the results of this, but tried to get him to share what he had for it, but he really doesn't want to do that until he is sure on things as well. But he's really excited about the results of this, and they're really finding some different things, especially with kind of some of the inhibitor and stabilizer and then the interaction with timing there. So there's a plot map. I couldn't get that all on one slide. The west half and then the east half. So it's not very easy to see, but right about from here to here, these outside 2 spans is what we had for the study. So almost a third to a half of the pivot on those outside 2 spans is taken up by this. So why we're doing the more precise nitrogen management, or why are we doing all these treatments? Just trying to get more precise management. Give the crop the nitrogen when it's needed, going back to this as well, trying to get more applications in this early end of the uptake rather than all of it pre-plant over here, where we're definitely more likely to lose nitrogen. And then also the nitrogen inhibitors could have a role, another tool in the toolbox, and a little bit of our sensor-based stuff kind of relates to the variable rate stuff, but we didn't do a whole lot with variable rate on here. But I also want to make the point that of not using a blanket approach for this, for nitrogen management, and then irrigation as well. There's obviously variability within field, but within fields, we also have farmers up in that area, and there's farmers all over as well that basically their nitrogen program is the same throughout all of their fields, which can be an issue, especially in some of these fields where they have silty clay on one half of their farms and then it's getting into the sand for the other. So that's an issue. So another thing, I know we're looking at a lot of different other things for these studies, but we like to encourage people to follow the UNL algorithm or something pretty similar. There's a lot of other available products that will probably get you similar results, but account for all of the credits. One thing I've talked about is the nitrate concentration in the water. That's something that sometimes can be a hard sell. Guys will argue that we don't know how much we're going to irrigate, what if we're not able to irrigate, but that's something that, especially with the prices of fertilizer doing what they are now, it's like less nitrogen you're going to be applying, you need to account for that. And if they don't account for that, that can be a pretty sizable amount of over application that really just ends up in the groundwater and causes issues. Another thing I really want to point out for this algorithm is having a realistic yield goal is important. So there's the algorithm itself there. I'm not going to go into much detail there. Some of you probably have learned that and kind of have that pounded into your head at some point, but it's hard to remember all of it. But down here we have the 1.2 times the yield goal. One thing important for that yield goal is that actually calls for 5-year average yield multiplied by 1.05. There's a lot of guys, I think, that just maybe choose the best of those 5 years for that, or use the best yield they'd ever gotten, or the best yield they hear from the coffee shop, which is probably the worst case scenario. But just making sure that number is accurate also helps to get more precise nitrogen recommendation as well. And that kind of relates to my next point I kind of want to make, is to trying to get guys to farm for profit rather than farming for yield, not necessarily chasing the yield. What everyone talks about, at least up in that neck of the woods, seems like you hear a lot about yield, but you never, well, one thing is a lot of people don't want to talk about their profit stuff, but you need to be thinking about that. I talked about this, but some of the worldwide events right now are kind of forcing people to think about this more as well. But you need to just think, is obtaining that maximum yield really the most profitable? Can cost a lot of money, putting on that extra nitrogen and water. So realistic yield goal, I want to keep going back to that. So, and then also having more precise irrigation management can make a big difference as well. If you're overwatering in one area of the field due to maybe you have an issue with your sprinkler package or something, or a lot of different issues, or different soil types, that's pushing some of that nitrogen that you paid a lot of money for down into the groundwater past the root zone, so you can't use that as much. So there's water scheduling is important. There's a lot of different technology. You guys might know more about it than I do for sensors for soil and plant. Variable rate in some situations could be a good option. It's probably not something that's going to pay on every field for irrigation, but it's something to look at, something that maybe in the future some of this technology will be a little bit cheaper, maybe a little more feasible, and do not over irrigate. So with that, I'm going to go into the last site that we're doing. This is a diversified crop rotation site, and this site is more or less, I'm managing this and doing a lot of the work because we're not able to do as much of what the farmer is, just due to the plot. Not able to have the farmer do as much just with how the plots are laid out. And I also have Miniku Mammo, he's an educator up there for Dixon and Wayne, Knox County, helping with that as well. But so the area, and as a lot of Nebraska is, it's traditionally been dominated by either continuous corn or corn and soybean rotation systems. So corn has kind of been found to be we put a lot of nitrogen on corn, I'll just put it that way. But what we're looking at is inserting winter wheat into the irrigated corn and soybean rotation. I know that's done in other areas, but up in northeast Nebraska, there's not a lot of it. If there is wheat, it's on dry land acres, but there really isn't as much wheat there as I'd personally like to see. Maybe I'm a little bit biased. And then we're also looking at growing corn after a few years of alfalfa into that system. So big nitrogen credit for the legume and alfalfa. We want people to try to take advantage of that and trying to show that that can be a profitable system as well. And all of these, we're hoping to look at the profit margin as well for this, especially with this rotation, because if we're proposing something that's good for the groundwater, it's not going to do any good if it doesn't flow financially. So this is the treatment list for this, and notice there I've got all 3 years of the study outlined there, so you can see what the treatment will be all throughout. So we have alfalfa in all of the years versus switching to corn after 2 years and switching to corn after 1 year in that rotation. So originally the first year of the project we had a lot more alfalfa out there, and we decided to cut some of that out. Some of that was because this is only a 3-year grant. We don't know for sure if we're going to get funding or not. If we do, we'll keep going with that. But basically the ones that would go into year 4 and 5 are not for sure going to be seen first. So we cut those out and are not looking at them as much, but we may end up later on if this project gets funded again. But we're also looking at the continuous corn, and then the corn soybean rotation, and then the corn soy wheat. We have 3 different treatments that have that with different aspects of the treatment for different years. And we also have irrigated pasture in there as well. And that's just something to compare to as well, because that's probably our best case scenario. So in terms of leaching, so that having that grass in there all year round, those roots are gonna take up that nitrogen, not really all that much nitrogen put on. So that's really more or less a comparison thing for us to use. I don't know if we're really gonna say, hey, well, I'm sure the NRDs would really like it if we came out and said, hey, we need to put your pivots into pasture, but that's probably not realistically gonna happen. So there's the plot map for that. As I said, we did cut some things out of this study just to try to simplify things and make it a little easier to manage, and cut some things out that we probably weren't gonna see anything on. So there's a lot of corn. So the corn is the dark green. It was done, added corn to make it easier for the farmer to manage that we're working with, so they could do a little bit more of that. We've got pasture. My colors are not showing up very well here especially, but a little bit of pasture, and then the different alfalfas in there as well. This was what the plots were in 2020, so that's the wheat, or 2021, so that's the wheat we planted in the fall of 2021, so the wheat that's planted out there now is in a different spot. But, so, okay, so why we're doing this, I kind of got into before, but continuous corn has the most potential for nitrate leaching for one thing, just lots of corn put on, lots of nitrogen put on the corn, and then the corn soybean rotation still has that corn in there, a lot of nitrogen there as well. But the alfalfa, we feel like deep roots can really scavenge to get some of that nitrogen to produce. So legume is producing some, there's a good credit, could be up to 100 pounds credit. So one thing we're really wanting to emphasize too with going into corn after alfalfa is do not manage it like the rest of your corn. Your soil samples and going through the actual algorithm should tell you to not do that. And then inserting the small grains, that goes a little bit back into the timing of why I talked about we do the cover crop as well. And I'm not going to go back and bring up that graph again, but when a lot of the nitrate leaching is occurring is really when the wheat crop or the winter small grain crop is really taking up a lot of the nitrogen and taking up its nitrogen and taking up a lot of irrigation water. So that's, for one thing, timing as well. And it's always good to diversify the rotation, I feel like. And then other crops, maybe there's some other things we'll need to look at in the future as well. There were a few things we tried to look at in the first year but decided not to continue on with. But could be some other things come up, hopefully. So that pretty much sums up what this grant research work was done. There's still a lot of other stuff going on in the Bazile area. The administration of the university is really pushing some of their faculty to do research up there and do stuff on farms up there. So the on-farm research network has a little bit of a presence there. I'd like it to be more of a presence, something I'm probably going to be trying to recruit for up there. Dr. Dan Snow at the School of Natural Resources is actually doing a carbon injection project. Didn't have the equipment ready to go last fall, but this spring did some work with injecting wood chips. I'll get into a little bit more detail on those since I'm a little more involved in it. A few years back, before this NET grant thing really got going in 2019, we did a demo of a Hagee high boy like we did some of our late season interseeding treatments on. That was pretty well received. We really didn't do anything for data wise since basically the whole field was done on 3 farmers' fields. There's also been some, Troy Gilmore, also at the School of Natural Resources, is doing some surface water sampling. They're trying to look, really look in detail as to what's going on with the nitrate coming into the streams from the groundwater up there as well. He can talk about that in a lot more detail than I am, so I'm not going to get into that, not really my expertise area. And then there's also Vado zone sampling going on as well, and that's Dan Snow, the same guy doing the carbon injection, where they're taking really deep samples all the way to the groundwater, trying to see what we have for nitrate moving that's went past the root zone and down to the groundwater. So the precision nitrogen on-farm research project, I think they're trying to get farmers all throughout the state, but this is one of the areas they really wanted to push. Just looking at several different protocols, some crop models like we did for some of our stuff, nitrification inhibitors, and there's quite a few others, but there's more up there, and the on-farm research network can really, if you're interested in something, the chances are they can find a protocol for it and help you find something that you can do if you've got kind of the equipment to do it, and they can help you out quite a bit. But there is one of them I'm gonna kind of outline that takes place up there. Basically, the treatment for this is just with and without inhibitor. So the yellow is where he put inhibitor on this 120 acre, and the white is the control with no inhibitor. One thing nice about the on-farm research network stuff, granted that is a pretty good chunk of his area that is in the control, but he can do what he wants with the rest of it, and that's still kind of considered one of the treatments as well. So we're getting data from his yield monitor, but they also had lysimeters out there. Lysimeters, basically, they're suction cup lysimeters. You apply suction on them and come back and collect the water from a certain depth, and you can get a kind of a feel throughout the season of what you have for nitrate movement. So we've have those out there as well, and also I think there's some watermark sensors as well for this study. That a lot of that the farmer didn't have to deal with any of the sensors. That was all myself, and then I think there's a couple grad students out there as well. So the carbon injection project I talked about a little bit. So this is Dr. Dan Snow. He did some of this work trying to simulate it in soil columns in the lab, trying to get some wood chips and then looking at different species and different things and putting them, injecting below the root zone with the intent that carbon will intercept and tie up the nitrogen. So he did a lot of his research with the soil columns and then just wanted to see, hey, can we do this in a field? So he and worked with some of the engineers at UNL to kind of get this contraption put together. Basically just a hopper that feeds down, and it's got a tube behind a shank. It worked, but I don't know if it worked all that well, so if this is something that needs to be done or gets more traction, something better has to be engineered. But they are looking to do more with that. I don't know what happened with the yield for that. That's kind of the main thing they were wanting to look at out in the field when they did it. The grad student that was working on that, I believe, had to go back to China, probably got stuck in quarantine or something, so he haven't really looked at the data for that, but they did take yield samples. So, but the new project that kind of led by Javed Iqbal, who I talked about before, and then Dan Snow as well, looking at manure incorporation into this and then cover crops as well. So they're looking at the different combinations of this carbon injection, manure, and cover crop, trying to look at what maybe could be considered the best case scenario using these three practices. That's hopefully going to happen this growing season. Just got funding approved for it. Looking for farmers right now. We'd like to have it up on the Bazile, but it doesn't necessarily need to be. So we'll see what happens there. So, and there's just a picture I took from the highboy demo we had. I think it's probably one of our more successful field days just because we had something shiny and new to show to people, a piece of equipment rather than some UNL guy talking in front of PowerPoint slides. So a little more exciting there. So, and all that we're doing with this research doesn't really matter if we don't work on the outreach component of it. So I know, get into that briefly here. That's probably not the main thing I wanted to talk about today. But the Bazile group established a communications team shortly after I was brought on, and this team has employees from all four NRDs and Nebraska Extension as well, so the local employees up there as well, myself included. And really this group does all of the work for our field days for the Bazile groundwater management area, and then reports back what we're doing to the steering committee. Basically what happened when it was just a big steering committee, they'd talk about it one month, the next month they'd still talk about it, and it just was a lot, not as efficient as us just getting together and doing it with a smaller group of the people that were actually gonna be getting everything all put together. But the main focus of this group was outreach for this grant. So this grant, we had to do in-season field days and then also winter field meetings as well. And we also do a social media outreach for this. So there's a Facebook page and a Twitter page, trying to do as much as we can for in-season updates on these projects. Sometimes that's easier said than done. And we also have our own website. So some things are in-season field day for the 2 years that we've had it. First year was about September, and it was predicted to be rainy all day and about 40 degrees. We decided that's not very good to do outside, so we moved it inside. Worked out all right, but we still like to be outside and in the plots, showing actual examples from, hopefully from in the plots, but having hands-on things and varying things up. Also having maybe shorter sessions and moving back and forth between sessions. We also had a farmer panel. Actually for this, we hosted it this year with Farm Journal Foundation, so they helped us a little bit with advertising as well, and got some people together to speak as well for that. So winter meetings, we've hosted meetings with NRCS, kind of tagging along with some of the, I think there was a Dan Gillespie up at the Norfolk NRCS office had a big no-toe meeting that we kind of tagged along with. One year, NRCS could not do that with COVID, so this last spring we did a 3-part webinar series trying to do short, 45 minutes, that's it. We actually did it over the lunch hour, which I know some people may not like that, but if there's somebody working, they can hop off and do it. So that actually was received fairly well. And March 16th, we're hosting a meeting in Plainview, hoping to share some of the more specific results from these demonstration sites. We're also going to try to put those results up on the website as much as we can as well once things come in, so that may be something to look out for in a couple months as well. And then we'll also have some other speakers talk as well to vary things up other than just talking about the results from these. We also tried to do some other work for outreach as well, tried to get some citizen action groups put together, just some trying to get more education happening beyond what we do, because we really feel there's a lot of research that says that people learn from their peers and not necessarily from government agencies or university guys. We do our best, but a lot of times it's a combination effort. But maybe us trying to help that group out a little bit. But our intent was to have 3 meetings in 3 different communities, have an outside facilitator, and really not have any very much for NRD personnel at all there. We felt like if certain NRD personnel were there, people would not open up about the issue as much. It's good in theory, but also we wanted it to be a listening session. This was, I think, a good idea in theory, but we tried to do it like the day before COVID hit was the first one, and then we had a couple of them a couple weeks later, and it doesn't work very well when you do one in March, then a couple more in December, half virtual, half not. It needed to happen in person, so timing was not good with that. We've also had some farmer peer group meetings as well. We've had a lot more success with this. And this was more or less started by an NRCS employee that had a lot of good contacts and had some good farmers that he wanted to start the group with. So started the group. He personally invited him. I think he made a bunch of phone calls for it, just basically getting guys together to talk about what they're doing, not have very little input from the university or NRCS folks present, and actually try not to have too many of them, so they'll just have 1 or 2 of us and then maybe 10 to 15 farmers at these. And the farmers, really farmer driven, farmers determining the agenda, and then farmers actually presenting on what they're doing and trying to work out things out between themselves. That's still kind of getting going, but I think that's had more success than the other citizen action group deal we tried to do. Some of that may have been just timing, but so take home of everything in the Bazile and this research. There's a lot being done, both in terms of research and outreach, but there's a lot to be done yet as well. this is a big issue, and it's one of those issues that we're probably just gonna keep pounding and pounding away at it and make very little progress, but we're still trying to make what progress we can. In terms of agriculture, I still want to promote farm for profit rather than yield. Farming is not one size fits all. Timing is really important for nitrogen application as well as cover crop seeding. And stay tuned. I hope that there's more coming out of this group. Hope we get some interesting results from these studies as well. So.